Hey, I am really privileged to get to spend the evening with you guys. At the risk of sounding like what I am, the oldest guy in the room, I like being here and watching what you guys do when you worship because, excuse me, it's a fascinating thing to watch the presence of the Spirit of Christ that is in you, that you bring into this place, and it becomes something together that is really extraordinary. I'm a little bit too strong. Turn it the other way. There you go. When I was in college, Diane and I, my wife's name is Diane, by the way, if you didn't know that, we had the gift from God that we were allowed to go to a church that loved college students. And we went to a little church that only had about 300 people, but about 150 of those people were college students. And we had a pastor that loved college students, and he taught us a lot about the Christian life and about how to walk with the Lord. And then when we moved to Texas so that I could work on my master's degree and later on my PhD, we were a part of a great church that had a Sunday school class that we were in. And in that Sunday school class, I learned more about community than probably any place I'd ever been in my life. And that's where I began to understand that the Christian life was not a solo endeavor. It's not just me and Jesus against the world, but it really is a group project. It's something that we do in community. And what the enemy does is he tries to get us to sort of be very American. I'm still too strong. He tries to get us to be very American and be real individualistic. And I don't need anybody. I don't need other people. And the fact of the matter is, you can't live this life that we talk about so much around this place if you do it on your own. It has to be in community. When I was in my late 20s, I went and began to pastor my first church. I'd finished all my classroom work, and I was working on my doctoral dissertation. And I went to pastor a church, and it was a little First Baptist church in a county seat town out in West Texas. And I remember there was a lady in our church that would write. She was a freelance writer, and she had articles published in the newspaper all the time, the Wichita Falls Tribune, I think it was called. And she had an article published one time that was about the brands, like, you burn into the rump of a cow, the brands of Throckmorton County. I was the pastor of First Baptist Church Throckmorton, and she had done all this research in the courthouse, in the dusty records from decades back. And she wrote this article and basically wrote the history of our county from telling the backstory of all the brands of the different ranches that were in that county. And it was fascinating because I'd never thought about it much, but brands have something to do with either a personal symbol or sometimes it's the initials of a family name or some significant something that identifies a particular family that owns a particular ranch. But regardless of what the brand was, regardless of what family it represented, all the brands functioned in essentially the same way. A brand on a cow is there to identify who that cow belongs to. And it dawned on me at that church when I was reading that article, it was like the Lord said, the name Christian is like a brand. It's supposed to identify who owns you. The problem is there are too many people in our generation that wear the brand, they carry the name Christian, but they don't exhibit any of the marks, any of the expected characteristics that we think should be associated with that name. And so that was the first time that I began to look and see what those marks were. And I ran across a passage that has been one of my favorite passages. It's really kind of an odd passage to be your favorite. You ask people what their favorite passages are, and they're usually some glowing, prophetic something or one of the great Psalms that everybody knows. This passage has meant a lot to me over the years, and that's what I want to share with you tonight. open your Bibles to the 3rd chapter of Mark. Mark is the shortest of the 4 Gospels. Mark represents really, we could call it Peter's Gospel. Mark is the one who wrote it, but we believe that Mark's Gospel is really Peter's version of things. And Mark has he records in the 3rd chapter what was certainly a truly significant moment for that group of men who eventually began to be called the 12. And it was the day that Jesus called them to follow him in an extraordinary way. Now, they had already loosely attached themselves to him. They had already asked him, who he was, and they had heard him teach, and he had already started to do some things in his public ministry. But he hadn't really sealed the deal that these guys were not going to just step in and step out. They weren't just going to hear Jesus teach when he was local. They weren't going to just, get bits and pieces here and there. It was time to finalize that they were going to be all in, and they were going to leave behind everything that they had been previously committed to, and they were going to be disciples. They were going to be followers of Jesus. And in the 3rd chapter of Mark, we have Mark telling us essentially Peter's remembrance of that day. So let me read these verses, and then I just want to break it down for you, because I think there's some incredible things here that we can learn about what it means to wear the name of Christ, to be a Christian, to be branded by the one who owns us. In Mark chapter 3, beginning in verse 13, speaking about Jesus, it says, "And he went up on the mountain and summoned those whom he himself wanted, and they came to him. And he appointed 12 so that they would be with him, and that he could send them out to preach and to have authority to cast out the demons. And he appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder, and Andrew and Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him." Now, I want to talk about what it means to be a disciple. And first of all, you need to understand that words matter. The word disciple shows up in the New Testament 269 times. And the word Christian shows up an additional 3 times, like in Acts chapter 11, when the disciples were first called Christians. But the name Christian still identified that exact same group that the word disciple identified. They simply began to take on a new version of their identity because it was becoming clear as the Gentiles were coming into the faith that Christianity could no longer be seen as a subset of Judaism. And so 269 times disciple, 3 more times Christian. That's the language that the New Testament uses to describe people who follow Jesus. Somewhere along the way in the 20th century, we exchanged the word disciple or follower, and we started to use the word member. And all of a sudden, we no longer were following Jesus, we were members of a church. Well, there's a significant difference there, because to be a member of something is simply to have sort of a loose attachment, but it doesn't really require any great sacrifice on my part. I mean, you sign up, you fill out the right paperwork, and boom, you're a member. And when we begin to call ourselves members, we lost the sense of forward motion that comes with the word disciple. You see, this word disciple, when we use it nowadays, I've heard preachers talk about, are you ready to be a disciple? And we act like the biblical idea of a disciple is something that you do when you're really going to be serious. Like you're taking the next step. You're going to be kind of an over-the-top, kind of a super Christian. I'm going to be a disciple. Except the New Testament doesn't view it that way. In the New Testament, the disciple is not some super Christian. He's not somebody with all the bells and whistles of some sort of incredible walk with Christ. A disciple is the basic level, the basic mode of transportation in the kingdom. A disciple is the very essence of who we are. In fact, when you go see Jesus teach the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, what you find is we look at that sermon and we're like, wow, what a standard that he holds up. We need to strive to live at that high standard. But what you need to understand is Jesus was saying, no, this is what the normal follower looks like. This is what the life of a disciple looks like. But we've so lost that sense of determination to be like Jesus that we've turned what the New Testament views as basic discipleship, we've turned that into something that only a select few ever live up to. And we've watered it down so that now we're just members. Well, what are you a member of? Well, I go to this church. It's on 111th Street. It's called Evergreen. If you just go to a church, if you're just a member of a church, then you need to understand that you're not even living up to the basic approach of what Jesus teaches in the New Testament when he says, I want you to deny yourself, I want you to take up your cross, and I want you to follow me. So in this passage, what we have is we have Jesus calling a group of 12 men to be disciples. Now, it says in some versions that he was calling them to be apostles. Now, we'll talk about that in just a minute. But this idea of disciple, I heard somebody give a modern definition of the word disciple one time. He said the word disciple means a learner or a student. And I went, yeah, sort of. The word disciple in Greek actually does mean a learner or a student. But you've got to understand how different that was from what we think when we hear those words. See, in our educational system, when you're a student, you go to a school and you have a whole host of teachers. I mean, you get to college and you have experts in every department and they teach different subjects. And the way you earn a degree in our system is you just keep going to class. You just keep passing your classes, and what happens is they give you credits. So, this class has 3 credits. This class has 4 credits. And what you do is over time, you stack all those credits in a corner, and when you get enough credits, they let you walk across the stage and they give you a diploma. For us, the idea of being a learner means that we're chasing information, and we get it from different places, whoever is the expert. And when we get enough information that we can graduate, we are then no longer a student. The word disciple means student, but it meant something different in the ancient world because they didn't go to school and have different classes under different teachers. The way you were a student in the ancient world was you attached yourself to a teacher. A better word would be like apprentice, where you attach yourself to one person and you learn from that person how to live the life that he's instructing. And so the word does mean student, but it doesn't mean somebody who collects information. It means somebody who's attached to a teacher. My son, Taylor, he probably doesn't want me to tell this story, but Taylor is really good at karate. He probably doesn't talk about that much. He grew up in doing karate, and we did karate together for a number of years, and he's got medals that he'll never show you and championships and things like that. But one of the things that I learned in karate, and I wish I could remember the word because I've lost it. I need to go back and try and track it down one of these days. There is a word in Japanese that is an important word within the discipline of karate. And the word literally means sharing shadows. And it's a word that's applied to the way you learn karate. Because you don't learn karate by studying a book or going to a class and learning from different people. You learn karate because you attach yourself to a sensei, to a master. And he teaches you, and you learn karate by doing exactly what he does. He teaches you katas, which are different sets of moves. I mean, if you've never seen anything with karate, you probably know wax on and wax off, you know. Those are moves, but you learn those because the master does them and you imitate them and you do exactly what he did. And this word in Japanese is the philosophy of following a master until you can become the master, because it means you you follow what he does so closely that it's like when the sun shines down, there's a single shadow. You follow him so closely that you share shadows. The word disciple in the New Testament has that kind of connotation to it. We don't become a member of a church. We follow Jesus, but we follow him in a way that he lives the life, he puts it on display, and we match that, we imitate that, and we walk as closely as we can to him. Because what we want to do is we want to experience the life that he's teaching us, and we can only do that by sharing in the way that he lives the life. Now, here's the thing that you need to see. The first point of this lesson is that you, as a disciple, an authentic disciple is chosen by Jesus. Okay? Look at this first verse that we read, verse 13. It says, he went up on the mountain and summoned those whom he himself wanted, and they came to him. Now, the parallel story of this event is in the Gospel of Luke. And in Luke tells us that Jesus actually went up on the mountain and he prayed all night long. In other words, Jesus didn't just pick followers willy-nilly. He went into the Father's presence, and he came out of the Father's presence after praying all night, and he called 12 men, and he said, I want you to follow me. And I love this verse 13 because it says that he summoned them, and they came. In other words, there has to be a moment in the life of a Christian when you have a sense that Jesus issued a call. He summoned you. He said, I want you to follow me. I'm not talking to the people behind you. I'm not talking to the people beside you or the people in front of you. I'm talking to you. I want you to follow me. And there has to be a moment in your spiritual life where you can say, I came to him. I responded to that. Now, I'm not telling you that you have to have some dramatic, mountaintop moment where you can point to and say, at 12:15 on this date, I came to Jesus. It doesn't have to be like that, but there does have to be a sense that somewhere along the way in my life, Jesus selected me, and he issued a call, and I came to him. I responded. Now, when Jesus calls you, it says he summoned those to whom he himself wanted, and they came to him. And then it says that he appointed 12. Now, we could talk about that. That's really got some symbolism because of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jesus was basically setting up Christianity. They couldn't imagine where this was all going to go. I mean, they're right at the very beginning of this. They have no idea that the cross is coming. They have no idea that they're going to see him transfigured, that they're going to watch him ascend into heaven. They have no idea that there's a Holy Spirit that's going to come and take up residence in their life. They don't know any of that. That's all still to unfold. But he said, I'm going to appoint 12 because I'm setting up something that's going to last the rest of human history. Now, he's chosen them, and it's important at some place in your testimony where you have the sense that you've been chosen. But the next part of this, and this is the part I really like, is that as they come to Jesus, he chooses them specifically for the purpose of sending them out. Now, in this point, it says he appointed 12, and he gives them 3 job assignments. Okay? Look at this. The first one, it says he appointed 12 so that they would be with him. Now, it's easy to kind of look past that because we want to get on to the next part because he's going to say, and then I'm going to send you out to preach, and then I'm going to give you authority to cast out demons. And we want to talk about that. I mean, we want to talk about preaching and the gospel. We want to talk about casting out demons. But there is a first step that we blaze right past a lot of times. Jesus said, here's the first thing. I want you to be with me. Now, there's lots of ways Jesus could have prepared them for what was coming. I mean, he could have taken them to Rome, where they could have done some study on political systems and the way to influence political decisions in the ancient world. I mean, he could have taken them to Jerusalem and put them under the rabbinic teaching of the experts in the law there. And he could have said, I want you to get all the content of the Old Testament. He could have given them a seminar in the cultural issues of the Galilean peninsula. I mean, he could have done a lot of things. But he didn't do that. He said, I want you to be with me. I had a lady in a church one time who came to me, and she said, Pastor, I really, and she was honest. She goes, I really don't like the way you lead this church. Well, that'll make your day, right? She goes, you talk a lot about reading the Bible, about spending time in prayer, about being with Jesus. She goes, I want to do something. I want to make a difference in this world. I want to be involved in ministry, and I want to change people's lives. I go, man, I love what I hear in your heart, but here's what you don't understand. You can't do anything for Jesus until you have learned how to be with Jesus. Because the first step of discipleship is sharing his shadow. That's why we read our Bibles. That's why we spend time in prayer, because we're not ready to go out and change the world until we have seen through the eyes of Jesus the things that he saw, until we hear with the ears of Jesus the cries of people that he heard, until we see the world and have the heartbeat that Jesus had. See, even these 12, there was a time when Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, and he stands outside the city, and he's just looking. The Jerusalem of the first century was a very impressive sight. The temple was there, and it was covered. It was designed in such a way that at high noon, and in the middle part of the day, the sun gleamed off of the temple, and I mean, it was a stunning sight. People would come over the mountains down into that valley, and they would see it, and their breath would be taken away. Jesus stood outside the city one day, and he just began to weep, because he knew that as gorgeous as the temple was, and as impressive as the city of Jerusalem was, he said, these people, they're like sheep without a shepherd. They're scattered. They don't know which way to go. They don't know how to feed themselves. They're not protected from the wolves. No one is looking out for them, and they don't even realize what a terrible situation they're in. And if you use your sanctified imagination a little bit, what you don't see in the text is you don't see any of the 12 weeping over Jerusalem as well. It's like they're standing back going, what did we miss? Why is he crying? What's the problem? I mean, we're here. Why'd we stop? See, they had been with Jesus, but their learning, their discipleship wasn't complete yet, because they didn't have his heartbeat. They couldn't see what he saw. They couldn't feel what he felt. That's why the basic entry activity of discipleship is that we have to be with him. Nothing else can be accomplished. That's what John tells us later when he tells us that the words of Jesus, that if we don't abide in him, then we can't accomplish anything. What Jesus is saying is what he said at the beginning. He says later in his ministry to the same group, he says, you can't accomplish anything unless you catch me, unless you catch what makes you like me. You need to share my shadow. You need to walk in the steps that I take. You need to be a disciple. Now, what's interesting about this is he says, I want you to be with me. That's prayer. That's Bible study. That's worship. That's what we do in community. It's being with the people of God who make up what we now call the body of Christ. Don't ever look at those kinds of disciplines of the faith and go, well, that's okay for those people, but, I'm a mover and a shaker. I'm a leader. I'm going to go do something. I'm going to accomplish something. No, actually, you're not. You're not ever going to do anything worthwhile for the kingdom until you've been with Jesus first. He tells them next that once they've been with him, he says, I'm going to send you out to preach. Now, that's pretty cool. Now, again, words matter, and we've taken the word preach, and we make it something that a preacher does. And really, the word in Greek simply means, I'm going to send you out to tell people what you know. People say things to me all the time like, oh, I could never preach. And I go, let me correct you. You might not be able to preach on a stage in front of 1,000 people. But you can preach if you understand what the word means. The word means tell people the truth that they need to hear. Now, how do you know the truth they need to hear? Well, because you've been with Jesus. In the 1940s, there was a centennial celebration. I think it was 1947. All of the Bell, today's AT&T, it used to be Southwestern Bell and Northwestern Bell and all that. They were named after Alexander Graham Bell, who invented communications, basically. And the centennial celebration in 1947 of his original invention, the motto was, Alexander Bell, he gave the world a new voice. Now, there's one thing about Americans. We are good at advertising mottos. I mean, that's actually a pretty good one. He gave the world a new voice. But what we need to understand, and Christians fall into this trap sometimes because we get caught up in technology and we want to do flashy things and we want to do media presentations and we want to do all this stuff because we're giving the world a new voice. The world doesn't need a new voice. The world needs a new word. They need a new message. And we're the ones, because we've been with Jesus, we're the ones that now have the message to share with people that they actually need to hear so that they can figure out how to live the life that they're being invited to live. And so Jesus said, once you've been with me, once you've learned what it is to be like me, then I'm going to send you out. And you're going to represent me as you go out. And he's going to tell them at the very end before he is ascended, he gives them the Great Commission. And remember what he says there? He says, I want you to go into all the world, and I want you to make disciples. In other words, you've been with me. Now I'm sending you out to tell people the truth. And as they attach themselves to you, they're going to learn how to be like me. The Apostle Paul, in 3 different places in his letters, said to different churches, imitate me. Now, people look at that and they go, oh, Paul's a little full of himself. But he wasn't. He's not saying, I've got it all figured out, so just follow me. He's saying, I'm going to follow Jesus so closely that you're not even going to be able to see 2 shadows. I'm going to be sharing his shadow. So if you have confidence that I'm following him, you just follow me. You just do what I do. Discipleship is not complicated. It's not scary. It's simply following Jesus and then having somebody come alongside and you showing them how you follow Jesus until they learn how to do the same things that you're doing. Okay? So he says, I want you to be with me, and then I'm going to send you out to preach, to tell other people what you've learned from being with me. And then he says this, and this throws us for a loop because we don't know what to make of this. He says, and then I'm going to give you authority to cast out the demons. Again, words matter. In our generation, because of the whole horror genre of movies, we think we know about demons. We have all of these ideas, and it's very interesting because when I talk to people about demons, they go, oh, I want to talk to you about spiritual warfare. I want to talk to you about demons. And it doesn't take me very many questions before I get to the place where I can show them that what you think about demons comes from Hollywood more than it comes from the scriptures. Okay? Now, demons are real. Don't get me wrong. Don't hear me say that they're not. Demons are real. But we have this idea that casting out demons is like an exorcist movie. And you got to have holy water, and you got to have a crucifix, and somebody's going to get thrown against the wall, and and there's going to be projectile vomiting, and we have all of these ideas when it comes to casting out demons. What you need to understand is demons are really more cowardly than we think. They love it that we're afraid of them when they're actually the ones that are afraid of us. And we need to recognize that. The fact is, when Jesus says, I'm going to give you authority to cast out demons, he didn't mean I'm going to make every follower of mine for the next 2,000 years exorcists who just run around looking under rocks and under bushes looking for demons that they can cast out. Let me tell you how you cast out demons. Cast out demons by recognizing that there is a very real evil in this world today. And it is the motivating force behind so much of what happens in our culture, in our generation. But the way that we cast out demons, think about it like this. When in World War I, they had invented something horrible that was called trench warfare. And there were parallel trenches in the battlefields, and they would fight these battles. And if you could beat the enemy back, they would retreat to the next trench, and you would advance to this trench. And that's why World War I was so devastating in the number of people that were killed, because they literally fought that war by gaining 50 yards at a time as they moved from trench to trench. Spiritual warfare is a lot like that, in the sense that evil entrenches itself in our culture. And every time that we put Christ on display, every time we speak the truth, every time we witness to somebody, every time we have an act of kindness, every time we do something that goes against the powers that have dominated human history, every time we push back, we advance the kingdom. And when the kingdom of God advances, the kingdom of Satan retreats. How do we cast out demons? Well, you lead somebody to Christ. You take them out of the kingdom of darkness and you introduce them to the kingdom of light. You act in a way that people go, wait a minute, that's not normal. That's not what anybody else does. How are you like that? He said, I'm going to give you authority to literally change the course of human history. You're going to be with me. You're going to learn what it means to walk with me. Then you're going to have the calling to go tell people the truth. And as you tell people the truth, and as they attach themselves and become disciples, and you show them how to follow me, you're going to have my authority to advance to the next trench and push back the enemy. You see, in Matthew chapter 16, Jesus says about the church, he introduces the church to the disciples, and he says that he's going to establish this thing called the church. Now, the disciples don't really know at that point all about what the church is going to be. But he says something interesting. He says, and the gates of hell will not withstand the church. Now, in our generation, there are a lot of pastors in a lot of churches who have this bunker mentality. And it's like Satan has all the power out there. So we gather ourselves in our churches and we slam the door shut and we bunker ourselves. This is where we're safe from the enemy. But the New Testament has a very different idea. The church is not on defensive mode. The church is on offensive mode. Gates are not an offensive weapon of war. I mean, nobody ever, I watch war movies. I love war movies. I've seen just about every good war movie that's ever been made. And never once have I seen somebody go, all right, boys, here we go. Grab the gates. We're going to take the next trench. No, you don't take the gates with you. When he says the gates of hell will not prevail against the church, he means the church is advancing until the day that they are locked behind the gates of hell. And even that won't keep us from victory. See, we gotta capture this. We've been with Jesus. We are being with Jesus. He gives us the charge to go tell people the truth, to proclaim what it means to follow Jesus. And then he gives us authority to change the world by driving the darkness back to the gates of hell. And even then, those gates can't withstand the advance of the church. Now look at this. It says in verses 16 through 19, that's the rest of this passage. It's just the names of these disciples. Let me read them again. He appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter. Now, that's interesting because Peter means rock. And Jesus did what they often did in the Old Testament was that when God made use of somebody, he would often give them a new name to symbolize their usefulness going forward. He appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter. James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, to them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. They were apparently, these two brothers, they were rough and tumble, man. The sons of thunder. There's a family in our church, and they have a son named Thunder. I met Thunder when he was a toddler. And man, that was a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, who names their kid Thunder? Jesus called them sons of thunder. I think probably it was a term of affection because they were just, they were all in to anything that happened. They wanted to be right in the middle of it. It says, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot. Simon the Zealots were a political party. They were all about killing Romans. But here we now have a Simon whose zealotry is enlightened by something else. And then there's this mysterious motivation of one, Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. Now here's the thing about this list of 12. These are extraordinarily ordinary people. I mean, they're fishermen. Matthew's a tax collector. 11 of them are Judeans. One of them is, 11 of them are Galileans. One of them is a Judean. They didn't have great faith early on. In fact, one of them was going to have serious doubts along the way. Everything that we read about these 12 men is that there was nothing really to commend them. I mean, you wouldn't, if you were trying to start a movement and you said this movement is going to last at least 2,000 years, these are probably not the guys you pick. Frankly, I take great encouragement from that because Jesus makes use of not the best and the brightest. He doesn't go out and find the picture perfect, Hollywood type that's going to look good on a recruiting poster. He just found 12 guys, and turns out he was only going to keep 11 of them. But he said, these are men who will follow me, and they'll be all in. You don't have to be incredibly talented to be used by Jesus. You just have to be all in following him. Now, here's the other thing about this list. I love that their names are listed here. Because this movement that we call Christianity was going to come to the place where it was really dangerous to be a part of it, to be associated with it. In fact, in our generation, the people that I have the least amount of respect for are the people that stay out on the fringe edges of the faith because they don't want anybody to be offended. They don't want to do anything that might get them into trouble. They don't want to upset anybody. Listen, you got to remember, these 12 guys, it was impossible for them to disassociate themselves, to distance themselves from Jesus because they had put their names on the dotted line. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of the Declaration of Independence. That document that is so crucial to the founding of this nation. Everybody loves those glowing words. We believe these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And it talks about our unalienable rights. And it's got this real poetic flow to that prose. But you want to know the most significant part of the Declaration of Independence? It's not the prose all the way through that has such lofty ambition. It's the signatures of 56 men who put their names on the bottom of that page knowing that if they didn't win this war, that they were going to hang, because the king had exact knowledge of who the instigators were. In fact, it says at the end of that document that these men that have signed this document, they have pledged their lives, what does it say? Do you remember? Their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. In other words, they were all in. One of the men said, we will either hang together in this or we will hang separately. You see, Christianity is community. And there is something required of us, and that is to be so all in that we identify with Christ come hell or high water. We put our names on the dotted line and we say, this is me. I'm here. I'm in. When Peter told Mark to write down these 12 names, the church was already being persecuted. When Mark wrote this gospel, Jesus is already in heaven. The church in Acts was already unfolding. Mark was looking back to give the church a document that would help instruct new believers the things that Jesus had taught the original group of 12. But he said, put the names down. Doesn't matter about persecution. It doesn't matter if they come for us. We're all in, even if that means our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So here's what it comes to. Discipleship is not something that we dabble in. It's not something that we do when we don't have anything else to do. Discipleship is when we make the commitment because Jesus summoned us and we came to him. And he said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to be with me. Then I want you to go out and preach. Tell people the truth. And then I want you to have authority to change the world in my name. And I want you to be so all in that you don't care who knows it. You wear the name Christian, and it's not a casual nickname. It is a brand of who owns you. Let me tell you one more story, and then we'll be finished. Probably the greatest general in history was Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great actually died when he was about 33 or 34 years of age. But he marched his armies off the map of the known world in his day, and nobody ever defeated him. One of the things, though, that he had intense loyalty from his soldiers, but he also had something that instilled a little bit of fear, and that was if you abandoned your brothers in battle, I mean, if you ran away, if you tried to go AWOL, he was ruthless. I mean, that was a capital offense. He would have your head chopped off because there was the one thing that he couldn't abide was somebody expressing a cowardice in the middle of the army, because he understood that cowardice is infectious. It infects the other brothers, the other soldiers when they see you run away. There's a legendary story about a young man, a young man, who had probably run away to join Alexander's army, but overwhelmed by his first battle, it was more than he could take. And so in the middle of the night, he tried to slip away and run away. And he was caught by the guards on the outskirts of the camp. And he was brought in handcuffs into the tent of Alexander the Great, who everyone fully expected to issue instructions that this AWOL soldier be taken out and executed. But there was something about him. He was young, he was trembling in fear, and for some reason, Alexander on that particular night took pity. Maybe it was because he was so young, maybe it was just clearly in over his head, and instead of ordering his execution, he just began to talk to him. Where are you from? Who's your father? When did you come here? When did you arrive? Tell me about your experience in the battle today that made you so afraid. And as he talked, the tension in the room, in the tent, just sort of melted away. The guards relaxed, And the boy that had been trembling kind of relaxed because Alexander was clearly not as intimidating as they all expected him to be. And just as that conversation was coming to a close and it looked like the boy was going to survive the night, Alexander said, "By the way, what is your name?" And with obvious pride, the boy kind of made himself erect and he said, "My name is Alexander, sir." And as the legend is told, Alexander the Great got a steely look in his eye, and his jaw set, and you could feel as the guards went rigid, the tension level in the room began to rise, and the boy began to melt. He didn't know what had happened, but everything was different. And it was because he told him that his name was Alexander. And with his teeth almost clenched, that great general got real close to that boy's face. And he said, "Let me tell you this, boy. From this moment forward, you do one of two things. You either change your name or you change your ways." If we're going to wear the name of Jesus, the challenge for us is to let the Holy Spirit examine our lives and make the decision that we're either going to change our name or we're going to change our ways. But if we wear the brand of Jesus Christ, we better walk the walk of a disciple. He called them apostles. Some translations have in this passage apostle. They weren't apostles yet. They were just disciples. But Jesus always sees us not as we are, but as he intends for us to be. So when Peter was talking to Mark and he said, we weren't apostles yet. We hadn't been sent out. We weren't representatives of Jesus yet. But he called us by that term because he saw what we were going to become as we followed him. Don't let the enemy tell you all of your shortcomings that will keep you from being great in the kingdom. Because I promise you this, that Jesus who summoned you, who is teaching you, who gives you the truth to preach, who gives you the authority to change the world, that Jesus doesn't see you as you are. He sees you as he's making you to be. Live who you really are in the eyes of Jesus. That's the goal of a disciple. Let's say a prayer. Father, thank you for this passage, for these 12 men, particularly the 11 who lived faithfully and carried out the call that you put in their lives. Thank you for recording this through the pen of Mark and preserving it for us so that we can see the incredible calling that is ours as followers of Jesus Christ. Never let us be content to be members or attenders. Lord, let us be authentic and follow you. Let us chase you with everything that we have. Our names are on the dotted line. We are all in, no matter what comes. I pray that that will be the case for these that we call Reach, that you'll be honored by the lives that we each live in your name. Amen.